I want to bring you now a bit of a change of pace, a special interview with two retiring members of Parliament from opposing sides. One's a Conservative warrior who also holds the distinction of Grandfather of the House, which is the longest-serving member of the House of Representatives. The other, a Labor luminary and one of the most decent men you'll come across in politics. Together, they've served in the House of Representatives for a combined total of 47 years. Now, in this modern era of turning over our politicians, I think that's pretty extraordinary. Joining me now from Canberra is the Liberal member for Menzies, a suburban seat in Melbourne, Mr Kevin Andrews, and from Canberra, the Labor member for Fowler in the heartland of Western Sydney, Mr Chris Hayes. To you first, if I can, Kevin Andrews, when you were elected back in 1991, I think I was probably in my second year of my law degree, Paul Keating was the Prime Minister, Alan Border was our test captain. The median house price in Victoria, God help us, was $119,000. What motivated you back then to get into politics?
Bob Hawke was actually Prime Minister, Peter, but what motivated me to get into politics was a concern for families, particularly with children. I and my wife, Margie, had worked on a part-time voluntary basis, helping couples with marriage education. And one of the lessons we got out of that was that families were struggling in terms of raising children. And I thought that we could do more, that government could do more. And that's what I devoted myself to when I got elected for the first decade or so in Parliament.
Well, you're right to remind me, in 1991 too. Chris, you went to politics as the member for Werriwa, first in Western Sydney back in March 2005. Kim Beazley had just replaced Mark Latham as Labor leader. How has politics changed in the time you've been in Canberra?
Pretty interesting question, Peter. I think it has changed. I think when I went to Canberra, very much so. Well, firstly, I went in, I think I was 49 or 50 when I went into politics. So I went in with a background, firstly in trade unions, then in business. And when I was selected to go into the Parliament by the Labor Party, it was because I had also a reasonably strong background in community, raising a family in Western Sydney, for instance. I think that the biggest thing I see with young people coming in is probably the expectation that you've got to come in and really be a gladiator and particularly aim to actually score a scalp on the other side of politics. As you know, Kevin and I and actually our spouses, Margaret and my wife Bernadette, have been close friends for many years. I think in our generation we have not hidden the fact that we have friends and good colleagues on both sides of the aisle. And I think that is one of the biggest changes I've seen since I've been here.
Yeah, look, I'd have to echo that. I started working in politics in end of 98, 1999. I worked predominantly in the Senate, or only in the Senate in the Howard years. And there were a lot of friendships. Things were, I think, a lot more collegiate. And even when I went down into the House, the end of the Howard years, the start of the opposition years for the Liberal Party, they're not like they are now. I think there's a brutality in politics, even inside people's own parties, that we could do without. Kevin, you've been a minister, both the Howard government, of course, the Abbott government, time as Defence Minister. You know, I'm sure you're watching all these events closely and that speech today by the Ukrainian President. What achievements are you most proud of?
Well, you mentioned defence, Peter, and as you know, I was Defence Minister under Prime Minister Tony Abbott. And in a relatively short period of time, we did a substantial number of things. We finalised the one force structure for the Defence Force. We ordered the complete replacement of the Australian Navy. We drafted the Defence White Paper, which was subsequently released in 2016. There was a whole range of things, including discussions with, for example, Japan, India and the US, which were about revitalising, which has subsequently occurred, the Quad arrangements. So it may seem like a long time ago now, but reality is that all those measures that we took in defence at the time we've been able to build upon. And of course we now know just how important it is because, as President Zelensky reminded us just a half an hour ago, we live in a very different world to what we did even 5 years ago.
Yeah, it makes it all seem very prescient at the time. Great foresight there from you and the Prime Minister at the time. What about you, Chris? What are your highlights?
Well, Peter, I think hopefully being a half-decent representative for my local community, whether it be in Werriwa or where I am now in Fowler, which is the most multicultural community in the country. Hopefully I've been a reasonable advocate for them. But just some very recent highlights, if you like. We were successful getting a family out of Afghanistan with the cooperation of Minister Hawke not all that long ago, and that family's now now living in Liverpool. And I thought that was something decent to be able to do, and I think it's something because you can have reasonable relations on both sides of politics, be able to pick up the phone, and on that particular occasion, the minister actually brought his staff back in at 11 o'clock one night to work on the details for getting this family out. And more recently, we had an Australian citizen on death row in Thailand, and with the group, together with Senator Dean Smith, we produced an amicus brief direct to the Supreme Court. Now, this man not only is no longer on death row, all charges against him were dropped as a consequence of the brief, and he's now back living in Australia. So, look, there are things you can do, I think, when you can work collegiately, work together and produce results. Mm.
Kevin, the grandfather of the house, it's a title that says you've been there, you've seen and observed a lot of parliamentarians in your time. Give me your observations on the essence of leadership. When people ask me what makes a good leader, I think temperament is incredibly important and judgment. What about you? What makes a good leader?
Definitely temperament. I've seen, 7 or 8 Prime Ministers and dozens of ministers on both sides of politics over the past 30 years, and temperament is extremely important. Prudence in terms of judgment is also very important. But I think it's the ability to deal with a crisis. Everybody who comes into politics has a set of things that they want to do. But more often than not, you end up dealing with things that were unexpected and came along, and it's how you deal with those things which I think is the mark of a good leader. But secondly, I'd also say that leadership is about actually standing for something. As I said in remarks in terms of the late Senator Kimberley Kitching on the condolence motion, that she was someone who was prepared to plant her standard in the ground and say, here I stand, and if necessary, here I fall. And I think the polity would be much better if we have more people who are actually able to stand for a set of principles that they believe in, to argue them civilly. I quoted John F. Kennedy today in his inaugural address when I was making my valedictory remarks, when he said that civility is not a sign of weakness and sincerity is always subject to proof. I think we can have strong opinions and argue our cases, but we should be able to do so with civility and with respect for other points of view.
Chris, what advice would you give someone who wants to go into public life?
I'm probably the last person to ask on that, but I haven't been very good in the people I've promoted so far. But look, I think it's a matter of being grounded in the community, someone who actually has a desire to not simply enter public life with a view to actually making the front benches as soon as possible, someone who's prepared to put the community first and indeed try and put the community above politics. That's what the community really want, is someone to be their champion, to be their conduit for their views, their aspirations being brought before the biggest community in the country, the Australian Parliament. So look, I think it's really having very much a strong community base.
That is the best explanation of the real essence of representative democracy that I've heard in a long time, Chris Hayes. Thank you for your time. Kevin Andrews, you too. Thank you for your service on behalf of all my viewers, and I know many of your constituents over the years. Isn't that lovely? This is what politics really should be about more and more.